Hello everyone, welcome to the live lecture. So this lecture has been specifically designed for us to discuss about the preparation strategy and the analysis of syllabus of NET English Literature. Okay, so I welcome you all to this lecture where we will be specifically focusing upon the syllabus discussion and syllabus analysis of NET English Literature. So let me just give you a brief introduction about what NET is basically and why we need to clear it. So NET basically stands for National Eligibility Test, and it's like an eligibility test that you need to clear if you want to work as an assistant professor or you want to pursue your PhD from some prestigious institutions. So for that it's like an eligibility test. It makes you eligible to work as an assistant professor or carry on your work in research field. Okay, so in this lecture we'll be focusing upon the syllabus that has been given by UGC, that is the exam conducting body. Now from recent times NTA conducts the exam on behalf of UGC. So the syllabus that has been given by the body, and what kind of questions we can expect like from every topic till what difficulty level we have to study, what is the pattern in which UGC asks from different units. Okay, so without wasting much time, let's move on to the syllabus. Okay, first of all I'll just give you a brief intro that there are 10 units in the syllabus. So here are the 4 units and rest 6, here are the 6 units. All right, so these 10 are the units that we need to cover for our exam. Right now the basic doubt that the students mostly has, and the the basic problem that the student go through while preparing NET, and why there is a fuss around the syllabus and the difficulty level that the exam has, etc. Now the one of the basic reason that students face so many problems while specifically I'll talk about NET English Literature is because of the ambiguity of the syllabus. Right, see, this is what UGC gives you as the syllabus, that is unit 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's just focus on 4 units. So the headings that they give is simply drama, poetry, fiction, non-fiction. Now they don't give you any details like out of what you have to study out of this unit, what you need to focus upon at, they don't give you any kind of such details. Okay, that is why it becomes little difficult and little overwhelming for the students to actually understand. They're not able to understand what they need to study, what they need to focus upon, because see, this is a very vague kind of a syllabus that UGC gives us. Right, so that is why when we'll be discussing about the planning preparation strategy for our exam, I have divided it into various steps. And accordingly, the way I have designed my online course, when you'll go on our app and watch the topics of the lectures that we have prepared and the divisions and the classifications that we have done, it's based on certain these certain strategies that I'll be discussing in this lecture. So first of all, what we need to understand is step number 1 is division or classification of the syllabus. What I mean by division or classification is that as a student, as an aspirant for any competitive exam, I'm not talking about NET English Literature only, for any competitive exam, first of all you need to have a clear cut flowchart of the syllabus in front of you. Now the governing bodies, it's a very rare case that the governing bodies they provide us with a categorized subject that what you need to study under this etc. No, they don't provide it. They just provide us with these umbrella terms, like an overall term they give us. Under that term what you need to study, it's quite vague. Okay, so what your responsibility is, first step number 1 that you need to focus upon is division of the syllabus. It should be like for example a flow chart is like this. Here is the main topic, right? Then it should be divided, say for example, in 3 subtopics. Then those 3 subtopics should be divided accordingly, then them, and then them. So in this way a flow chart should be there in your mind, that for example if we see poetry, right, unit 2 is poetry. So under poetry what you need to study, then under those subtopics what are the things that are important, all this should be there in your mind when you start your preparation. So in this lecture we'll first focus upon the subcategories that you need to cover under every unit, how you need to focus start your preparation about drama, how you need to focus upon poetry, then literary theory, literary criticism, culture studies. All these are umbrella terms, and under them what subcategories are important, that first we'll discuss. Another thing we'll be discussing about is the common kind of pattern that UGC follows. Now one more thing that I want to focus upon is that certain units in UGC-Net syllabus are advanced level topics, certain are the basic level topics, right? So I'll just give you a brief intro that these first 4 units are foundation level units, which every even graduate students or postgraduate students, these 4 units you should be familiar with, you should be completely acquainted with in these 4 units, because these are the foundational level. A student of even graduation, okay, an undergrad student, even that student should be familiar with these 4 units, because these actually form the basis, or what we can say, the foundation of English literature. Later on, when we move upon then unit number, specifically if I talk about unit number 7, 8th, 9th and 10th, these 4 are the units which expect an advanced level understanding of literature, and when you have that level of understanding, then only it would be easier for you to understand these 4 units, right? So for that understanding, how I suggest, what I suggest for your preparation is, first try to be very, very familiar, try to be very what we can say, be very much acquainted with the first 4 units. Once you are like comfortable in those 4 units, and once you like have an idea about the overall trend that is followed in literature, then I would suggest you to move on to these units later on. Okay, so let's begin our discussion about these 4 units. Now how you approach studying these 4 units. Number one thing that I would suggest is that there are 2 methods of studying the literature. Here we'll talk about literature, means in literature everything is included, the drama, these are the various genres that are there in literature. So drama, poetry, fiction, non-fiction, all these comes under literature. So first of all, let me give you a very brief intro. Every grad student or post-grad student should have this brief idea how to approach studying literature. Number one thing you should understand, there are 2 methods of approaching literature as a beginner. One is vertical method, another one is horizontal method, and UGC expects you to be familiar in both the methods, right? Vertical as well as horizontal. Now what do we mean by vertical method? Vertical method is when we study the different trends and different works and different literary genres in literature age wise, means year wise. When we study it, that is known as vertical method of studying. And when we study it country wise, continent wise, like this kind of literature is being produced in this country, at the same time this type of literature was being produced in this continent, this is the horizontal method of studying. And UGC expects you to be familiar, very, very acquainted with both the methods, vertical as well as horizontal, right? Now another thing, first we need to, so this was a very first thing that you need to understand, that there are 2 methods. Number 2 things, you need to understand the difference between 2 terms. The 2 terms are, one is English literature, okay, so one is English literature, another one is literature in English. Now they look familiar, English literature and literature in English. What is the difference between the 2? English literature, here we'll specifically try to understand what actually English literature comprises of. Means in today's discussion, when we look at it from today's when we discuss about literature, so what actually English literature means. Basically English word comes from England, right? Anything belonging to England, it is the word English is used. So English was a language of Britain, UK, okay, England. Now England was the superpower of the world in the 18th, end of the 17th and 18th, 19th century. England was the superpower, and as we all know, more than half of the world was the colony of England, right? When it is a very common trend that happens whenever a country colonizes another country, right? We'll take an example as X and Y. For example, X colonized Y. So what happens is, the influence of X is always, very much like very deep influence of X goes on to on Y. What do I mean by this? For example, Britain colonized India, right? Now all the influences of English culture can be seen on India even today. So it is a very common trend that the impact of colonizers, say culture, language, food habits, eating habits, dressing habits, all these things are seen and are there on the colonized country on a very wide aspect. Now since England was a superpower and England was a colonizing country, for more than half of the world it colonized. So English language became a very a language that became common to all these countries. The reason why English as a language enjoys such a global status, such a it is considered as the as the second most important language of the world, why it is considered and why today English enjoys the status of being the professional language or the language of business purpose, educational purpose. It almost acts like a functional language in almost all the countries. There are very rare cases like China and Japan who doesn't pay heed to English, right? Otherwise almost all the countries has accepted English as the major language which is there in the country. Why is this? Because first of all, England itself was a superpower, and then rest of the countries, for example, even America, which is today's world power, was a colony of England, right? It was a colony of England, and that is why a huge influence of English culture, English language can be seen on America. Then America became a world power later on in 20th century and in the 21st century. America itself had a deep impact of England, then it became superpower. So it was like English enjoys that kind of status because of all these political reasons which has happened in the world. Now English, first of all, English literature, when we say, it's the literature that was produced in England. And the second category, that was literature in English, when we say, we mean literatures that are produced in all the other countries where English today has become a major language, right? Let me give you an example. For example, India, we take India. Now, English is not the, what we can say, the indigenous language, or English is not the first mother tongue of any of the states in India, right? It's always a second language in India, but still the amount of literature that is produced in English in India is much more in quantity as compared to the amount of literature that is produced in other languages, say Hindi or Tamil or other languages, right? It is always more, because English enjoys that kind of a status. So all the literature that is produced in England comes under English literature, and under literature in English comes the literatures that are produced in other non-English speaking worlds, but they produce literature in English language. So I hope this was clear to you. If you don't have, kindly comment your doubts and we can discuss it over more. Okay, now this thing is clear, I think. Next step that we should move upon is that when we study English literature, so vertical and horizontal method that I told you, so we focus upon these two things. Like when we study literature vertically, we'll study from where English literature started and how it gradually developed, what are the different trends that were there, say in 16th century, 17th century, 14th century, what were the trends and how slowly and gradually English literature developed, right? Then when we study country wise, we'll study how, like for different countries, like how English literature developed in America, how English literature developed in India, in Africa, Australia. All these kind of things will be covered under horizontal division of literature. Now why we need to study this age wise literature, and one more thing that is a very common doubt that the student has, like how much is history relevant when we study literature? What kind of importance does history has when we study literature? Why we need to study history, when we are studying literature? So that is the next thing that I'll like to clear. Number one, what is literature actually? A very cliche statement I'm going to give. Literature is basically the mirror of the society, right? It's a mirror of the society in the sense that whatever happens in our society is reflected in the literature. Okay, why? See, when a person is writing, now literature is produced by human beings, and human beings have deep influences of various factors around them: emotional, psychological, political, social, geographical. All these are the different influences that a human being has. No matter how hard I try not to be influenced by the external factors, but somewhere or the other I will be influenced by these factors while writing something. So when when a human being writes, no matter how hard you try, you'll have certain or the other impact of the sociological conditions that are around you, the political conditions that are around you will have a, it might be very minimum or it might be on a good extent, but there will be certain influences of these factors on your literary productions, right? So that is why when we study literature of various ages, we need to be familiar with the various historical or what we can say sociological factors that were happening around at that time. For example, I'll give you a very simple example. Let's imagine about 20th century. Now when we for example we started discussing about the 20th century literature. So when we study 20th century, we'll see, for example, if you're studying 20th century poetry, now we study poetry of 20th century, it will be a very common trend that we'll notice that most of the poets, most of the writers, they're discussing about death, about violence, about horrors of violence, we can say, about disease, sickness, about inflation, about hunger, about poverty, about, and mostly this theme that you will look at in the 20th century literature would be death and violence. Now I'll study the 20th century poetry, I'll notice that these are the themes, but I don't have any idea about the historical conditions that were there in the starting of the 20th century. I don't have any idea of the political situations that were there. So I'll not be able to understand that why these writers are so obsessed with the deaths and the violence that were happening around them. That was because they were facing World War I at that time. All right, World War I started in 1914 and ended in 1918. So the writers who wrote around this time, for example, say from 1911, 12 around till 1930s, we can say, they were having first hand experience of all these wars and how these kind of things, and it was the very first time that people witnessed war on such a mass level. Like the name is World War, as if almost all the world is at war with each other, right? So this was the kind of deaths that they experienced on a mass level. It was very horrifying for the people, and it deeply impacted their psyches on a very huge level. That's why we see, when we study the literature of beginning of the 20th century, we see their writers are writing about death and violence and all these kind of themes in their works. Later on, when we see, like when we move forward, like by the end of the 20th century, major themes which we can see is about, like, say, alienations, feelings of existentialism. Why these feelings are there? Because of the World War II. And this was the kind of impact that these things had. So once we have a brief idea about the political conditions, about the social situations, or about the historical actions that were happening around the people, it is easier for us to understand that, okay, these were the factors that were influencing the writers, these were the factors that the writers were worried about, or these were the things that were causing disturbance in their life, or which were influencing their psyche. That is why these people were writing like this. All right, so that is why basic understanding of history helps us to easily, not easily we can say, but to helps us understand the basic psyche of the people of that age, and then we can follow up their writings. So that is why we always suggest, whenever you start studying literature, you should be familiar with the history of that era and of that age. For example, when we study about English literature, okay, literature of England, when we study Elizabethan age, now we say that Renaissance happened during Elizabethan age, and it is considered as the golden age of literature. Now a question might come that why this age is considered the golden age of literature, and the answer again lies in the political situations, because this was the time period when Queen Elizabeth was ruling, and Queen Elizabeth's reign is considered a kind of time which was comparatively peaceful as compared to the earlier times, because before that there were Tudor war, dynasty wars, 100 years war and 30 years war of roses, etc., etc. All these things were happening, right? But during Queen Elizabeth's time, there was considerably peaceful environment in the country. That is why now, for production of any art, the environment needs to be peaceful. All right, it couldn't be possible that people are dying of hunger and they're producing art. That is a very rare thing that has happened, but very rarely, like 1% of the people does that. 99% don't care about art when it comes to poverty, right? If they're hungry, they'll focus upon food, not on their art, right? So for the production of literature, it's very important to have peaceful environment, and because England had a quite a peaceful time during Elizabethan age, that is why Elizabethan age is considered as the golden age of literature, and Renaissance flowered in England during this time. Okay, so that is why it is advisable, and I would strongly suggest you to study the basics of history whenever you start studying literature about any time period or about any country. You should just know the basics. Again, one more thing I would like to highlight here is that we are not history students, we are literature students. So you need to know how much focus you need to give on history. You don't need to go into very much detail about various historical events. You just need to study history as much as it is relevant to literature. Okay, not in detail, you need to not analyze about the various historical things that were happening. Whatever is relevant from literature point of view, that is all you need to know, right? For example, when we in our online course, when I teach about the literature of England, we have a brief discussion about the kind of political environment that was there in England, how Tudor dynasty was there, then how it became a republic, then again it was restored to monarchy, and then slowly and gradually what was the impact of French Revolution on England and English literature. So whatever is relevant to from literature perspective for a literature student, that is all you need to focus upon. Now let's talk about different that horizontal division. When we study about horizontal division of literature, we focus upon the literatures of, say, America. Then in American literature also there is a subdivision. Say for example, this is American literature. There is a subdivision which is known as Afro-American literature. It is a subcategory, and now it is considered a mainstream literature in like this category of American literature. So under American literature, we also need to focus upon Afro-American literature, and many a times question, like in the recent times, it has been a pattern of UGC to ask questions from this Afro-American genre, and it is a very important topic. When we study American literature, we need to know the brief, historical, say, experiences of America. For example, America was a colony of England, then slowly and gradually it freed itself, then it developed as an independent nation. So when these political or historical events happen, parallel to it, literature develops. When a country is when a country is colonized, or when a country is not free, you will see that kind of literature flowering in that country, right? And as soon as the country, the political setup of the country changes, the historical environment of the country changes, that kind of changes will be visible to you in the literature of that country. Okay, I'll explain it to you with a brief example. Let's talk about India for the understanding. When India was colonized, say before 1947, it was a colonized country, so people were not free to express, they were not the liberty was not there, etc., etc. When they were free, when they were not free, the kind of literature that was being produced at that time in India was, the themes were according to that people were writing about sovereignty, and how they are, they aspire to have an independent country, and how they aspire to have an independent nation. When India got freedom from Britain in 1947, post 1947, the environment that was there in India was of developing. As a young nation, India wanted to develop. India wanted to become, go from a developing nation to a developed nation. So the gradual, what we can say, the urge to development, and the urge to fight all the evils that were there of colonization, etc., etc., that was there. So those are the themes that are visible. So the the momentum that is there in the political environment of a country, the same momentum follows in the literary productions of the country, right? So that is why we study in hand. So when we focus about America, how America was a colony, what impact England had on American literature, like first literatures that were produced in England in English language was by the migrants who came from England to America, right? So what influence that had, then slowly and gradually today American literature is studied as a separate genre from English literature. So what kind of developments were happening, and all these things will be studied. Then in Afro-American literature, what we'll study is that first of all, who are Afro-Americans, right? Why they came to America? What were the political situations which forced them to came to America? What were the kind of problems that they faced in America. So basically they were they were brought to America as slaves. So we need to study the history of slavery in America and the history of how this slave trade was going on almost in all around the world. So these slaves were brought from African continent to America, and then slowly and gradually with their continuous struggle, they gained the status of free human beings. They gained the status of citizenship from their American white masters. Then the issue of racism, issue of various, like for example apartheid, and all these things are there, which has a very deep influence on this Afro-American community. And because these things like racism and discrimination and segregation and various laws like Jim Crow laws and different kinds of events like Civil War in America, which happened when Abraham Lincoln post that became the president. So all these things that happened has a very deep influence on the Afro-American community, right? Because they fought very hard for becoming, like, for being free of racist discrimination. And so Civil War happened in America. Then after Civil War also they gained certain rights, and then also later on Jim Crow laws were applied on America. So many of the racism things started happening again. Later on in 20th century, when we talk about, so Harlem Renaissance happened in like the 30s. The Harlem Renaissance happened, which was a flowering of Afro-American literature. Okay. And Harlem Renaissance happened because of a political reason only, because it's a very deep topic that we have covered in detail in our lecture series. So basically Harlem Renaissance also had very far-reaching political reasons why Harlem Renaissance basically happened in 1930s. Harlem Renaissance literature, which was produced by Afro-Americans, like jazz music and slave narratives were earlier. Okay, during Harlem Renaissance jazz music was there, then black theater developed around that, black arts movement happened later on in 20th century. So these were the things that were happening, and they had a direct impact of the political situations of the country, right? Now when we study Indian literature, again the same thing, that how when Britishers came into India, they slowly and gradually they started what we can say injecting the English language among the population, among the masses. Then slowly and gradually English education started happening in India, and people started becoming acquainted with the language of the colonizers, and they started gradually producing literature in English language. So that is how the gamut of Indian literature develops, right? So when we'll cover these 4 units, drama, poetry, fiction, non-fiction, we'll specifically be focusing on both these methods of vertical as well as horizontal division of literature, right? In drama, it's like drama, theatre, etc., poetry, fiction. Specifically, I would like to throw some light on non-fiction. What basically non-fictional prose includes are the periodicals, the essays, the religious writings that are written, or what we can say the political writings that are written at certain age. So all these things will be included in the unit 4. So these 4 units should be studied in both horizontal and vertical ways. The literature of various continents will come, like for example Indian subcontinent, which includes India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Pakistan, all these countries. The literature which is produced in these countries in English language should be studied. Then America, of course, under America, Afro-American literature. African literature also, because Africa was also a colony. Then Australian literature, certain writers from Canada, okay, Canadian literature, Russian literature also, French literature, some aspects of French literature, all that has been produced in English language in different countries. Also another thing is, some of the writers, say for example French writers, some Russian writers, they wrote in French or they wrote in Russian language, but the translation of their works into English language has also had a very deep influence on literary studies. So those works will also be studied under these things. Okay. So when this is how we cover. Now there is a note that is given by UGC for these, specifically these 4 units, is the first 4 units must also be tested through comprehension passages to assess critical reading, critical thinking and writing skills. These 4 units will cover all literatures in English. Okay. So please focus, all literature means both vertical as well as horizontal. All right. So then we have one more thing that they say is recently this has been started, that they give you a comprehension passage, all right. From last 2-3 times it has been the pattern that the last question that UGC gives in this exam is about the comprehension passage, where they give you an excerpt from some essay or they give you some poetry, and then accordingly, like for example, we had reading portion in our exams in school days. In the same way, a comprehension passage of certain excerpts of a essay or poetry will be given to you, and then you know that you have to answer questions from that comprehension passage. Okay, that is also a pattern. So in this 4 unit, you should have an idea that how English literature started, like from England, when we'll start studying in England, how English started in England. See, English was not a native language of even England. Okay, it started with the coming of the Angles and Saxons from the, they were Germanic tribes. Okay, in the 6th century, 5th century, they came from Germany. Okay, they migrated to this island of England. It was an island at that time. These Angles, Saxons and Jutes, they came to England. Then the language of these Angles and Saxons, okay, it slowly, you know, evolution happened, and this language became what today we are, you know, we know it as English language. Then so this Angles, Saxons, Jutes, these tribal, you know, groups, they were developing. They started their evolution in the island of England from say 8th century, 9th century, 10th century. Then in 1066, okay, William the Conqueror, okay, a French king, he conquered England. So the French colonization of England started in 1066. That is a Norman conquest of England happened. From later on, when after Norman conquest of 1066, we see the language of Angles and Saxons that was going on, and the French influence. Both of these languages mixed together, and then it developed what we know today as English language. Earlier there was no language as English language. It was the language of Angles, Saxons and Jutes. Then it was developing, and then 1066 Norman conquest of England happened. Later on, French influences started coming on England. So after 1066, language of Angles and Saxons and language of French, okay, both Norman language, this specific dialect, both of these things mixed, and it developed to English language. So earlier than this Norman conquest, that is the Old English period, then there is Middle English period, and then there is Later English period. So then Middle English developed, which has a very deep influence of French language. So we see many French words coming into English language, with deep influence of French writers, French philosophers, French styles. For a very long time, say till 16th century, 15th century, English writers, you know, worked upon the models of French writers. They had a very deep, what we can say, they used to treat them as their models, as their ideals, okay, French writers, etc. So French influence can be seen. Then slowly and gradually in 1400s, when Chaucer you know, wrote his Canterbury Tales, then the standardization of English started happening. Then slowly and gradually Renaissance happened in England during Queen Elizabeth's time. Shakespeare started writing. So all these influences started happening. At that time also there was a very deep influence of Italian models on English literature, French models on English literature, Latin, Roman. All these influences were there in these initial times, which today we consider as a medieval period of English literature, right? Then slowly and gradually from Elizabethan time, we moved on to the next stages. Then neoclassical age happened. So one more thing that I want to clear about Elizabethan age is that Elizabethan age basically includes Jacobean age in itself, right? Means many the times I have been asked this question that you know, some books give it as a separate classification, some doesn't, that what basically is Jacobean age. Now Jacobean age is actually when you know, one more thing I want to clarify here is, whenever you study history or any literary trend, it will always move in a pyramid form, right? Means how a pyramid works, like this, right? This is a pyramid. Now how we you know, literary trends work, there is always a germination period like this, okay? Whatever literary trend or literary fashion will be there will always be a germinating period when it will start growing. There will be a peak time when it will be on its peak, on its heights, okay, completely flowered, and then there will be a downfall. No matter which age you study, which country's literature you study, which you know, continent's literature you study, this is the pattern that every trend, and not only in literature, even in social theories, if we study political theories, sociological stories, economic theories, even when we study, we see this pattern of germination, then reaching the peak, and then the downfall, right? So the same pyramid form will be applied to the study of literary studies. So whenever in an age you see a development of a trend, we will see a certain germination, then reaching its peak and then downfall. So when Elizabethan age, this downfall is actually the Jacobean age, what we say. Okay. For example, Queen Elizabeth reigned till 1603. She died in 1603. And Jacobean age is considered from 1603 till 1625 is the Jacobean age, which is actually a kind of a degradation of all the kind of literature that was produced in England during Queen Elizabeth's time. Okay. Then post that we have the reign of Charles II, Charles I. Okay, so restoration happened in England. Many this was a time of political upheaval for England in 1640, 1650, 1660s. Oliver Cromwell came in, England became a commonwealth. Then in 1660 monarchy was restored. So that is the period that we consider as the restoration literature of England in 1660s. Okay, so that is how these literature develop. Also neoclassical age, one more thing I want to clarify here is when we study neoclassical age, neoclassical age is actually a name of group of 3 ages, that is this restoration age, then post that pre-romantic age, all these ages 1660, from 1660 to 1798. 1798 is the start of the romantic age. Okay, so between all these there are various trends that were happening. We study all under the group of neoclassical age, right? Also another thing that influenced the literature of this 17th century after 1660 was in 1660 Royal Society of Sciences was formed by a charter was passed by King Charles I. So after Royal Society was specifically dedicated to the development of scientific studies, scientific research and scientific in England, right? So in 1660s when specific focus was given on science, so we'll see the trend is followed in literature also, that the literature that was produced after 1660 follows a very scientific method of development. People are focusing more on logic, on symmetry, on patterns, on these specific things which are very peculiar to scientific studies. So see, this is how social experiments or social scenarios influence the literature. So after 1660 the restoration literature that we'll see a very deep influence of these scientific phenomena like logic, symmetry, pattern, etc, etc. Okay, so then 1660s later on 1700s we have pre-romantic age, and in 1798 with the publication of lyrical ballet by Wordsworth and Coleridge we begin the age of Romanticism, right? And Romanticism had a very deep influence. See, the year 1798. So if you can remember just 10-12 years ago what happened, a very big international event that happened was French Revolution initiated with the people bombarded the Bastille jail. Okay, 1789. So French Revolution had a very deep influence on the kind of literature that was produced in Romantic age. So if you want to study Romantic age, you need to be familiar with French Revolution, the Napoleonic wars that happened, different kind of things that were happening in French during that time, because they have a very deep influence on English literature of these times. Then 1798 Romantic age developed slowly and gradually till 1832. In 1832 so there is a confusion or we can say a controversy is there regarding the starting point of Victorian age. Some scholars say it's 1832, some scholars say it's 1837, and there is a detailed explanation for that. For that you can go and assess my video lecture. So 1837 Queen Victoria came to reign, then Victorian age starts and it continues till 1901 after the death of Queen Victoria. Then 1901 we consider till World War I, we consider that as Georgian age or Edwardian age we can also say. Then post World War I, that is our modern age. Okay, from post World War I, that is 1918 till 1945 what we can say will be the modern age. Post 1945, that is after the end of World War II, post World War II era will be our postmodern age. Then again with the starting of postmodern age also there is various controversies and various theories that have been given by literary theorists and historians that we will be discussing in detail in the lecture series. Okay. Then postmodern age continues, and some says that postmodern age is still continuing till today in 2020. Some say that even postmodern age is over and now we are in postmodern age. Various theories and different explanations are there for that we'll go in detail in later on. All right, so this is a brief idea I have given you that how English as a language started developing, and slowly and gradually with various changes that were happening in the political scenario of the world, historical, sociological scenario of the world, slowly and gradually it went on from say as a language and then till 2020 whatever kind of developments happened in various countries. Also it will go on like that, only whatever political situations were happening in those countries will be visible in the literature of those countries. So this is how we'll cover all these 4 genres vertically as well as horizontally: drama, poetry, fiction and non-fiction, right? So this will actually cover all literatures. What UGC expects us to cover, the all literatures of English language will be covered through this method of studying. Okay, so now let's move upon the unit number 5. So unit number 5 is a new unit that was introduced by UGC recently in 2018, I think last trimester of 2018 this was introduced. Basically earlier also questions were asked, but now it has been given like a separate unit. So sorry, no, unit 6 was introduced later on. Unit 5 was there earlier also, but now more focus is upon unit 5. So unit 5 is language, that is basic concepts, theories and pedagogy, English in use. Basically what they expect us to cover here is the basic idea theories of linguistics. Now linguistics is a separate subject, right? Like English literature is a subject, in the same way we have a separate subject which is linguistics. Okay, so linguistic and UGC also conducts an exam of Ugc-Net in linguistics specifically. So why we need to study language as a unit here is basically what linguistic is. I will give you a brief idea. Linguistic is scientific study of language, right? When we study language from a logical scientific pattern point of view, that is linguistics. Okay, being an English student, English is a language, right? So we need to have basic idea that how a language develops, how people acquire that language, how it influences them, how it influences the society around them. We need to understand these basic things. So that is what UGC expects us to know in unit number 5. That is the basic theories and the basic methods through which language, scientific study of language could take place. So under this, what we need to cover is we need to cover various methods of teaching English, like for example English as a second language, English as a foreign language, so ESL, EFL, all these methods we should be familiar. There are various methods that have been devised by various linguists, okay, on various like theories. For example, if you want to teach English to a person whose mother tongue is some other language, then it will be a different scenario how you will teach English as a language, okay. Or if you want to teach someone English language for whom English is a second language, then it will be different. People for whom English is a foreign language, then the methods will be different. So under this we will be covering various methods like the universal method, the grammar method, okay. All these different kinds of methods are covered under this series, where we will specifically be focusing upon linguistics and pedagogy, that is the teaching methods that should be, you know, focused upon how when a teacher is teaching. So how as teachers, because see, NET is an exam which is like an eligibility for being assistant professor, so you need to have certain aptitude of teaching, certain theories about how you can teach and etc. All right, so that is all is covered in unit number 5. Then at unit number 6, English in India, history, evolution and futures, is that in this unit you will specifically focus upon, say, English language, how it came to India. We will specifically focus upon the development of English as a language in India, because of course we are Indians, right? So how English came to India now. One thing you need to focus upon here is that English was never a mother tongue of Indians, right? But today if we see almost all the professional works, even the main language that is used in Indian courts, most of the states, the high courts, the supreme courts, the official language is English. Some states like Rajasthan etc., they have asked the permission to use Hindi also as a second language, but majorly if we see the primary language in which the court proceedings or the official works that happen in India is in English language. Now how English is a foreign language, English is not a language that developed in India. So how English, you know, developed this say this status or this prestigious position of being from a foreign language, it became, say, one of the major sought after language in India. How it happened that it was a foreign language of the colonizers, but today if we see, it is considered as the major language. Like, if parents want their students, want their kids to study, they want them to study in English medium schools, people want to study English language, they want to know, learn how to speak in English, how to communicate in English. Why English enjoys this, say, this prestigious position, how it became or how it gained this, say, prospect from, say, what we can say, from a foreign language to a major language in India. So this is the phenomena that we study under this unit number 6, history. That is how English came in India. So in history we'll have to cover that, how English education was introduced, like in 1813. Okay, the charter happened, the Charter Act happened, after which, you know, English was introduced. The schools were supposed to teach English as a primary language. Then later on, slowly and gradually, how these things happened. Okay, so the role of Lord Macaulay, Lord of William, all these things will be covered under this unit. Charter Act of 1835, then later on missionaries, what role missionaries played in the development of English language in India, all these things will be covered under this unit from 1813 till like later on. So that will be covered under evolution, that how it started. Then there was a very huge debate between the Anglicans and the Orientals. Now what are Anglicans and Orientals? Anglicans were the people who believed that you know, English culture and English language and all these things are you know, superior to the culture of India. Okay, Indian languages, Indian culture, Indian lifestyle, all these things are inferior as compared to English. People who believed in this were Anglicans, and people who believed opposite to it, they were Orientals. So there was a huge debate around this time between Orientals and Anglicans, that you know, which method. Some people believed that, you know, we should focus upon the Oriental language, we should focus upon the development of Oriental languages in England. Then some people believed that we should focus upon the you know, English language development, etc. Then there was huge debates, like some British officials believed that, you know, we are here to for the trade purposes, for business purpose, so we should not focus upon, you know, getting involved in culture and all these things. Okay, later on slowly and gradually developed. Okay, so it history, evolution, this will be covered. Then in futures what will be covered is, after 1947, what were the developments that happened in English language. So say after 1947, say Kothari Commission was there, then how English, what was the treatment of English. Say there was a huge controversy after 1947 when English was, you know, Hindi was supposed to be declared as the official language after India got independence. There was huge upheaval and rebel from southern states which didn't consider English as their major, Hindi as their major language. Non-Hindi speaking states like Telangana and Travancore, which was there a state at that time, all these states had a huge upheaval and they were completely against declaring Hindi as the official language. So because of that upheaval, you know, Jawaharlal Nehru implied this, that okay, let's focus, let's keep English only as the official language for 10 years, and when all the states of India will be like familiar with Hindi, then we'll remove English as the official language, and then from then onwards Hindi will be used as the official language. But that hasn't happened till today. Even till today, English is used as the major official language. So that was the you know, kind of scenario that will be developed, that will be studied in futures of English language. So specifically how English came to India, how it developed, and how it is still developing, what influence it has on Indians, and okay, all these things will be covered in this unit, English in India. All right. So this is a basic understanding, this is the foundation level understanding that you need to have of English literature. Okay, after that we'll come upon these 4 units. Out of these 4 units, I would suggest all the students of Net English Literature that after covering these 6 units, please don't start with this 7th unit, but start with 8th unit first, then this one, and then this. So please make your you know, chronology like 8th, 9th and then 7th, or 9th and 7th could be studied together only, but don't jump on 7th unit, because then it will be a little haphazard and it will not be, you know, very planned manner of studying. So first let me explain you what literary criticism is. See, literary criticism comes from the word critic. Okay, if you can see, this comes from the word critic. What does critic means? Critic means to analyze or interpret something. Now analyzing something or interpreting something is the thing that we do being literature students, right? Whenever literature is produced, the second step that we need to do is analyze it. Someone writes a novel, a poetry, what do other people do? They analyze it, they try to judge the merits, the demerits, etc., etc. That is what literary criticism is. So literary criticism is as old as literature. Whenever literature is written, the second step that happens, after production of any literary work is analysis of literary work. So literary works, then the analysis of literary works come under literary criticism. Most of the times, these are the topics the students mostly have problems with. They have huge doubts regarding these 3-4 units, specifically these 3 units. They are like completely, clueless what they're supposed to study, how they're supposed to attempt them, how they're supposed to approach them. They have huge doubts about it, right? Specifically about these 3 units. The reason it is, first of all, they're advanced level units. Okay, we don't expect an undergrad student to completely have a grip over these 3 units. Okay, in some universities of India, these topics are introduced at graduation level, but most of the universities, these topics are not introduced till postgraduate level. These are introduced in post graduation. So that is why, first of all, this is the reason the students don't have much idea how to prepare these 3 units. Number 2, I will say that this has been the fashion that has been there to make these literary theories and criticism as some kind of a havoc, that students are so much worried about all these things, which should not be there, because they are not so typical. All right, they are kind of they are just, you need to study them in a organized and structured manner, and they are as easy as other parts of literature, right? So for that structured manner, I would strongly suggest start with literary criticism. Under literary criticism, what you have to study is, you have to start from classical times. Now what do we mean by classical times? From the ancient times. And under ancient times, you will have to study Western as well as Indian classical criticism, because recently this has been a pattern by UGC to ask questions from even Indian classical theory, which was not there earlier. So when we focus upon Western classical theory, we will start with Aristotle's Poetics, Horace, Ars Poetica, Longinus on sublimity. Okay, all these works come under classical. So we will study the Greek works, then this Roman works, and all these works. When we focus upon Indian scenario, among Indian classical theory, the major important critic that we need to study is Bharat Muni and his work Natya Shastra. So Bharat Muni gave this Ras theory in Natya Shastra. So we need to be very familiar with this Ras theory, because recently this is like in vogue and people ask questions from this Ras theory. There are various Ras that has been, Ras is basically the essence of a work, okay, in very simple terms if I say. So various Ras that has been enlisted by Bharat Muni. Now again there is a controversy whether there are 8 or 9. Some scholars say there are 8 Ras, some say 9 Ras. There is a detailed explanation for that in our videos. So there's, for example, Shringar Ras, Veera, okay, all these kind of different Hasya Ras, all these Ras are there. You need to study them, okay. So this Bharat Muni's Natya Shastra is important work when we study Indian classical criticism. And then in Western, I have told you Horace, Longinus, Aristotle, Plato's The Republic, what he said about poets and mimesis, and all these things will be covered under that, okay. Then later on, when we move on to, after Dark Ages, we specifically focus upon the works of literary criticism that were produced in England. So we will be studying like Philip Sidney, then Alexander Pope, Ben Jonson, Dr. Samuel Johnson, the works by all these writers like Philip Sidney's Apology for Poetry, and Ben Jonson's work, Dr. Samuel Johnson's Preface to Shakespeare. All these things we'll be studying, we have to cover under criticism. So how basically criticism is, and why I say that you should start approaching literary criticism after you are done with the 4 units, because once you have an idea about literature, then only you can analyze literature. Once you have idea of the trends that are going on in literature in various countries in various time periods, then only it will be easier for you to analyze or interpret literature. So okay, for that you need a basic understanding of literature. Later on you start going on with the analysis. So literary criticism is basically how these people have given various theories about, say, poetry, how a person should go about writing novels. Say Joseph Andrews, in a preface to Joseph Andrews by Henry Fielding, he gives a very brief, a very detailed idea what he thinks is novel writing, because that was the time that novels was novel as a genre started emerging in England. Samuel Richardson's Clarissa, Pamela, etc. All these works were developing 1740s around. Okay, so these are the works that are important from then. Then when we come on to say Romantic Age, so Wordsworth, he wrote lyrical ballet in collaboration with Coleridge, which was published in 1798. Later on in 1800, a second edition of lyrical ballet was published, and in that second edition, Wordsworth wrote a preface to lyrical ballet. Now, preface to lyrical ballet today itself, it is considered as a very important work of romantic criticism. So we will study that preface to lyrical ballet, and this is a very common question and a very common confusion and mistake that students do. Whenever the year of preface to lyrical ballet is asked, most of the times the answer that the students mark is 1798, because they think that okay, lyrical ballet was published in 1798, the preface. No, this is a trick question that is there. In the first edition, preface was not there. Preface was added by Wordsworth in 1800 edition. Okay, so edition preface to lyrical ballet is in 1800 edition. So then preface to lyrical ballet is considered. Then Coleridge's Biographia Literaria is a very important work of romantic literary criticism. Then Keats, John Keats specifically didn't work upon criticism like directly, but he had a habit of writing letters to his friends, colleagues and family, and in his letters he mentioned certain things which today could be considered as literary criticism, like what he thinks about poetry, what he thinks about drama, etc, etc. All right, so these things, these letters of Keats are considered as the important works of literary criticism. Then later on, when we move on to say Leigh Hunt also was a very important name of this era. Later on, when we move on to Victorian ages, pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood was there, what they thought about poetry, how they analyze literature, etc. All these things will come. Matthew Arnold's works will come. Matthew Arnold, very important. Then later on, Oscar Wilde and etc. etc. And in the 20th century, T.S. Eliot, Yeats and Ezra Pound, all these people were writing what they think about poetry, how you can analyze it, how you can become a great writer, poet, novelist, dramatist, etc. etc. So all these things were happening, and in later on in 20th century, new historicism, then I.A. Richards and all these people started coming, and these were developed slowly and gradually. So this is literary criticism basically. Literary theory and culture studies is what? Say, literary theory is basically when we study literature, or when we attempt to study literature from point of view of different disciplines, right? For example, when we try to study literature or understand literature from the point of view, say from a psychological point of view, say from a sociological point of view, from a historical point of view, linguistic point of view, from different points of view. So English literature, so literature is a subject, in the same way psychology is a subject, sociology is a subject, economics is a subject. These are the different subjects that come under humanities, right? When we try to look at literature from the points of view of these various disciplines like psychology, sociology, economics, media, power structures, all these things, when we attempt to analyze literature from these point of view, that is what we study under literary theory. So when we will study literary theory, what we will be focusing upon, like the psychoanalytical theory by Sigmund Freud, he gave this theory in his work Interpretation of Dreams, which was published in 1900. So psychoanalytical theory, structuralism, very important, given by Saussure in his 1916 work. Okay, then later on it starts with new historicism, then slowly so feminist theories there, psychoanalytical Marxist theories there, then structuralism, post-structuralism, modernism, postmodernism, all these different things, and recently LGBT, that is LGBTQ, queer theories in very much vogue. All right, so all these theories, when we try to analyze literature from these points of view, from the points of view of different disciplines, that is what we study in the literary theory. So theorists, it doesn't it is not always necessary that theorist, whoever theorist's theory we are studying, that person had familiarity with literature. It is a very common trend that we, under literary theory, we study theories that were given by people with non-literary background. Most of the literary theorists are from, say, anthropological background, sociological background, psychological background. So from these different backgrounds, okay, so when we study literature from these points of view, and when we try to analyze it, that is literary theory. So theorists make theory, and when these theories are applied on literature, that becomes the work of literary critics, literary criticism. So in this way you can understand literary theory theorists develop a theory from different points of view, like for example psychoanalytical criticism. So in psychoanalytical criticism, what we see, we try to look at literary works from the theories or from the tenets that were given by Sigmund Freud, that is the theory of subconscious, id, ego, superego, all these kind of thing, then repressed emotions, how these things have influence. Then when we try to apply this psychoanalytical theory, which is a theory of psychology, when we try to apply it on literature, that becomes the work of literary critics. So maybe we can say this is the theory part, this is the practical part of the critics. All right. So this is how literary theory and criticism works. Now, so literary theory basically it developed post World War II. Why? See, post World War II, specifically in post World War II also, if we talk about specifically the decade of 1960s is the decade which is considered as the germination of literary theory. At this time there was huge upheaval that was happening in France specifically. Then all these important theorists like Lacan and Derrida, all these people, they were students at that time, and there were huge student protests that were going on in France in 1960s, and from then onwards this theory developed. Like Roland Barthes, he wrote his essay Death of the Author, and all these things happened after these, because post World War II what happened was, first of all, the globalization of world happened, the boundaries were blurred because of technological invention. Also, world became smaller and smaller, people were able to connect with easily, distances were measured less. So because of these things, many and because see, globally boundaries were blurring between different countries. In the same way, boundaries started blurring between different disciplines also. Now study of psychology could be merged with the study of sociology, which could be merged with the study of economics, and or through the study of synthesis of all different subjects, we try to understand the world. So this is what happens when we study literary theory, literary criticism, all those things. Now let's focus upon cultural studies. See, cultural studies started developing in the mid of 20th century with Birmingham School, and basically cultural theorists do is they study culture. Like for example, till today we had a practice. For example, we are given a poetry. Now we look at this poetry, we try to analyze, we try to do a critical appreciation, that is we try to analyze what are the different literary devices that are used, what are the different techniques that are used, the rhythm, the meter, the rhyme scheme, etc, 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 right? All these things we discuss about it. Then later on, these same techniques we apply, these culture theorists apply to analyze about different cultures. So briefly, if I just try to explain, culture theorists, what they do is they look at cultures, different cultures as a text, as an industry, and then they try to analyze it using the same techniques that we used to analyze our literature, right? So Birmingham School, with Birmingham School, this cultural studies as a discipline, as a what we can say educational discipline started with Birmingham School. Then Frankfurt School had a deep influence. Then Raymond Williams and Stuart Hall, all these people are the names which should be studied. So they, under cultural studies, they give various cultural theories, like how culture impacts literature, how literature impacts culture, and how this gametes goes on, like because of the blurring of the boundaries that has happened in 20th century, how these culture developments happen in the 20th century. So that is all that is covered in cultural studies. Sometimes some theories of cultural studies get merged with literary theory, some literary theories get merged with cultural studies. So we study them simultaneously, like parallelly we study them, because some of the things we need to understand from both points of view. Okay, these are the things that should be covered under these 3 units. Then the last unit, research methods and materials in English. Specifically this unit is focused upon how you can go about doing your future researches, further research, like after masters, people who want to go into research of literature, how they can pursue it. Like MLA edition, you should have knowledge about MLA edition, the recent MLA edition, the 8th edition, etc., the APA style, how what is literature review, how you go about conducting your research. About after literature review, how you need to make a blueprint of your research, and from different perspectives how you can analyze different literary ages or works or writers or trends, etc, etc. So all these things are covered under this unit. So this was a brief overview that I have given of the flow charts, you know, of the kind of a flow chart that you can make from this. I hope you had made some notes about it. So this is how, you know, we approach the study of NET English literature. All these things should be covered under when you know, when you are approaching the NET exam. So you should be familiar with all these different aspects, different scenarios that we have discussed over here, and this is how we go about in our discussion on English literature. Okay, so this was all about preparation strategy that should be followed by. Then the syllabus analysis we have done. If you have any doubts, you can just send in your doubts here and I can answer your doubts. All right, so now I'll look up on the comment section. Kindly send in your doubts if you are having. All those people who are appreciating, thank you so much. Now let's start with the question hour, and you all can send in your doubts to me. Whatever, if you have any queries or anything, we'll start with the question section. If you have any queries, you can mail in your doubts later on, and you can even send a mail to the institute, all right, and you can comment your doubts over here. We can discuss them. For more details, for more demo lectures, you can you know, download our app from Play Store. You will have all the information in the description box down below. So just go look at all the videos, the demo lectures that are there. You'll have a more detailed understanding on how you should start your preparation about NET, how you should, you know, start your preparation strategy, and how different topics should be studied, what are the different levels. So okay, so all these things could be covered under that section. So I hope this lecture was helpful to you all, and we'll see you in the next lecture. Thank you.